Hi, my name is Oliver, and in today's video I'll teach you how to animate transitions between scenes, so let's jump right into it. To get started, we need to build up some scenes, and therefore I want to take a couple of pictures of some 3D models, and as I quite honestly lack modeling skills, I've grabbed some from today's sponsor, Yellow Images. Yellow Images is the #1 marketplace for high quality premium mockups, creative fonts, 360 images, and a creative store full of amazing graphic assets like brushes, presets, illustrations, and more. With the Yellow Ticket subscription, you can make high quality projects 10 times cheaper with an average asset costing $1.50. You get free items for free every month, a 30% discount for custom mockup services, and you can buy anything 50% cheaper from the creative store. The Yellow Ticket saves you time and money. Follow the link in my description and use the code Oliver30 to get 30% off a free month or annual premium membership Yellow Ticket and an annual team membership Yellow Ticket. This coupon is limited and valid for 1 month only, starting today. Here on the Yellow Images website, you can see that we have all of the different categories. The one we'll be working with today is primarily the spinnable 360 images and the static PNG images. Here you can see we have all of the different categories, and then we have the 360 images underneath. The smart thing about this is that if you go into one of them, you can see that it loads all of the images and you can spin it around and get the perfect angle that you want. So for $15 you can get all 64 PNGs, and that way you can actually make it spin in After Effects if you wanted to. Now if I were to log into my account that has the premium membership Yellow Ticket, we can go back and you can see that I can get all of these 64 PNGs for only $1.50. If we go to the static image collection, these are just images that can be rotated. And for these ones, you can see that you can get them for only 80 cents. Now for this project, I've chosen some abstract PNGs from the same collection. You can see the first one is this guy with his head in half, and then we have all of these different elements exploding out of it. In these similar PNG images, you can just see that there's a lot of images in the same sort of style. So I've also selected this head with the hands crawling out. I have one where he's sort of worried. Then I have one where he's being pinched. And I have one where he's being crushed. And you can see that these last 4 are actually 360 images, so I can get the perfect angle. Now the idea for this video is that it will sort of be about anxiety. And with all of these different faces, with the hands pinching, crawling out and everything like that, it's supposed to be these sort of thoughts crushing the person. And then at the very end, we have this character where all of the different elements can explode out. And that's supposed to indicate that the person is letting go of all of these thoughts. So for these 360 images, you can see that we can download the right angle. I'm just going to download all angles for all of them so we can also animate a bit of rotation. Inside After Effects, I've created a new composition. Go to Composition, Composition Settings. You can just see that it's 1920 by 1920, and I've decided to make it 12 frames per second. Usually I work within the 24 frames per second range, but for this one, I just think that it's a lot more stylized and looks a lot cooler when we keep a low frame rate. That way the sort of rotation of the 360 images will be less choppy because the frame rate is so low. You can also see that I've imported all of the different images into After Effects. So I think I'll start out with the worried face. If I just double click this, you can see it's where he has his hands up to his face. And I want this guy to be moving from the right into the left, and therefore I also want him to rotate. So what we're going to do is first of all select the image that he will end up on. So it's this one. Hold down Shift and select the one that he will start on. Then we can drag it into the composition. And right now they're quite large, so we can press S and just scale them down. So they're roughly in the center. And you can just see that we have our number 5 on top, and then 6, 7, and 8 as we move down. Right now they're all on top of each other, and we don't want that. We want them to be sequenced. And I think for this one, we'll just make each image last around 2 frames. So we can go 2 frames ahead, select all of the layers, press Ctrl, Shift and D to split them, and delete the last part. So this way we just have these 2 frames for each image, and now we want to sequence them. So to do this, we'll select the image that needs to be at the start of the composition, hold down Shift and then select the last image. Then we can right click, go to Keyframe Assistant and sequence the layers, just click OK. And that way you can see that we have this movement. So right now it's quite choppy, but we will make it look a lot better when we add some position and rotation to this. I also wanted to accelerate a bit towards the end here. So I think this one will actually just last 1 frame. And then we'll just drag out the last one. So if we play that back, you can just see that he moves a bit quicker towards the end. And now we basically just want to add some positioning animation to this guy. One thing is that we don't want to add position keyframes to all of these different layers. So I'm just going to press Ctrl A and hide the scale. And then we'll go to Layer, New, Null Object, and we can just call this the starting position. That way we can take all of these different layers, parent them to the starting position, and then we can use that null object to move them all around at once. And now we just want to add some positioning animation. To press P, we want to right click the position and separate the dimensions. We're only going to work with the X position. And then let's say we go 8 frames ahead, add another keyframe, and at this point of time, he has moved in from the right to the left, and we want him to overshoot a bit. So we can go, let's say 5 frames ahead, and then add another keyframe. So at the very start, we'll just drag him out of view. Here in the center keyframe, drag him a tiny bit to the left for that overshoot. Then we can select all of the keyframes and press F9 to ease them, go into the graph editor. And here we only want to select the X position, and we want to work with the value graph. So we'll go to the start, and we want him to move in quite quickly from the start. So we'll just make him deaccelerate. Just push this a bit, and we just want to add a bit of easing here at the end. You can see he moves in from the right. There's a lot of impact on the movement because we made this 1 frame, so he sort of switches quite quickly right there. And now we just add some rotation. So go to the start, and we can press Shift and R to get the rotation. Add a keyframe, and we just want to add one at the same point of time where we added a keyframe to the position. So at the start we can press W, just rotate him a bit towards the right. Here at the center we want him to overshoot a tiny bit, so maybe around -2 degrees. And then we just want to press F9 to ease it, and do sort of the same easing as we did for the position. So make it deaccelerate, drag these out. And right now you can see we have that rotation overshoot. Maybe this is a bit too much, -1.5. But it's a bit boring right now. So we may want to add a bit of offsetting. I just take the rotation and offset it by 1 frame. And that way it just looks a bit more interesting. So for this next part, we wanted to transition from this 1 head to these 3 heads. And there's a few things you have to keep in mind when doing transitions like these from scene to scene to really make it quite smooth and less jagged really when you do that cut in the middle. So the first thing is that you have to maintain a certain movement from one scene to another. So the way I've done this is that I've added another null object and just parented the first null object to that one. That way you can see we have this first position and rotation animation, and then on top of that we add this scale animation. So he slowly starts to scale down, and if we go into the graph editor here, you can see that it speeds up towards the center, the value accelerates, and right when it's at the highest speed, we simply swap to the next scene, and you can see that we line up this head with the next head, so that way it transitions nicely, it's a nice cut, and you sort of hide that transition in the movement. Then for the 3 heads here, we have them all parented to the same scale, so they follow the same movement, and then to emphasize the sort of impact of this movement, we have these 2 heads at the back, and I've just simply animated their position. You can see it moves very quickly here when the cut happens. We have the highest value change, and then it sort of slows down. So they just move out, and we get 3 heads instead of the 1. Now one additional thing I've done here is that I've taken these heads and added an alpha matte. You can just see that if we disable this alpha matte, when we go to the start here, it really just appears on the other side, and when the head is going to the left, we only want it to be shown on the left side. So the alpha matte is just a simple white solid. So for this left head, it's set to alpha, which means that anything that's within this white box will be shown, as you can see. And then for the right head, it's set to alpha inverted matte. I just used the exact same shape layer over here, but the inverted matte just means that anything that's not within this white box will be shown. So that way you can just see that we keep them on either side. For this next scene transition, you can see that we have the three heads going into the final scene with the head sort of exploding with all these different thoughts. Now I used a few tricks here to hide the fact that I'm transitioning. The first one is that I'm using these camera movements to zoom in and first focus on the left side, then the right side. And this is quite simple. You can see that I've created a new null object, just taking the last one and parent it to that. So we have this sort of parent chain. And then I've just used whole keyframes to sort of swap the position and scale. I've just selected the keyframes, right clicked, and then toggled whole keyframes. And this just means that it doesn't change the position or scale until the next keyframe comes. So you can see it cuts in here, cuts over here, and then it just cuts out again. Now if I delete this layer, you can see the reason why I've done this. So when we transition to these three heads, I've also started a Y position movement upwards. And if I go into this, you can see it slowly starts to move upwards, and then it accelerates, and then it swaps right here when it's at the highest speed or the highest value change. One problem with this is that you can see it moves up way too far, and it just becomes sort of weird when we don't have the camera movement. So if I enable that again, we cut in and to the side, and we sort of always keep these objects centered vertically by doing these camera movements, and then we continue this upwards movement into the next scene, which just hides that transition very well. Now we want to add that head explosion to sort of emphasize that upwards movement, and it's actually quite simple to do. You can see that I have a bunch of duplicates of the character. The first one is just masked out, so we only have the character, and then I've masked out all of the individual objects and just animated them so they move from behind his head and just upwards and outwards. Now if we take a look at one of these objects, you can see within the position, I have animated it so it shoots up from the very start, has a very high value change, and then it deaccelerates and just keeps on moving slowly. That way it doesn't just stop, but we still have a bit of movement at the very end. Now I've done this actually in the speed graph because you can't really adjust the value graph that well. You don't have the handles when you haven't split up the position. So if I go into the speed graph and I turn on the reference graph, you can see we have the value graph and we want that to be smooth all along. So to quickly show you how I created this, we just press F9 to ease everything again. And you can see now the value graph has some easing at the start, then it eases out. And when we have this horizontal line, it comes to a complete stop. You can see this looks very weird, moves up quickly, stops completely. And instead of this, we want this smooth graph. So we'll take the speed graph and just emphasize the start, so it moves very quickly there. And you can see we still have this sort of bump right here at the second keyframe. And you have to imagine that we have the speed on the side here, and the speed is sort of determined by the area underneath this graph. And therefore, when the graph is very high, we have a very high speed. So if we drag this up a bit, you can see that we maintain some speed here, and we create this smooth graph. When I play this back, you can just see that we have that smooth movement. And I've just done the exact same for the rotation. So you can see it starts by being rotated negative 80 degrees, then goes to about negative 24, and then keeps on rotating a bit. And this is just the exact same thing. I turn off the show reference graph, and I've just done this in the value graph. Now, because we're working with this theme of anxiety, I've also added some text and a bit of animation to that. So if we select the text layer, you can just see that I've added a tracking text animator. And here I've simply taken the tracking amount and animated that. You can add a text animator by going up to animate. Then you can choose tracking. And here we can go to the very start, set the tracking to quite a low number, add a keyframe, go a bit ahead, and then we can just increase the tracking. Then we can ease it, go into the graph editor and just select the tracking amount and just make it pop out here at the start. And that way you can very easily animate the tracking. On top of that, I've also added a 4-color gradient to the text. You can see if I turn it off, it just doesn't stand out as much and it becomes quite flat. So with this gradient, I've just taken the eyedropper tool and selected a bunch of colors from the illustration, the gold especially. And then I've made sure that at these point of contacts, where you can see the text is on top of a gold object, I've just made it extra light. And that way you can see it just stands out a lot more. And with these points, I've just dragged them around to sort of get the result that I'm after. And then I've also added a drop shadow, just so it stands out a bit more from the background. To make everything loop, we need to start by making the objects disappear. So the first thing that I've done is taking these background elements and simply trimmed them down so you can see that they disappear at random. And really, I've just tried adjusting them over and over to get a random result that I like. Then I've also made that same effect happen to the text. You can do that quite easily with another text animator, animating the opacity. So if I were to create this again, I would go to animate, then choose opacity, then set the opacity to 0%, and in the range selector, you can then animate this. But right now it's way too smooth and it's not really that random. So what I'm going to do instead is go into advanced. I'm going to turn down the smoothness to 0% and then turn on the randomized order. So this way, when I start to animate it, you can see it disappears at random. I can just add a keyframe right here and then at the very end set it to 100. So this way it just disappears with the rest. And then the last thing that I've actually done here is just sort of take the same movement that I have at the start and add it to the end. So you can see on this null object, I've simply added some X position, made it move to the left, and you can see I've made it accelerate towards the end, and that way it just matches perfectly with the start here, where the object comes in. So when we play that back, you can see we have a perfect loop, and we use that movement to sort of transition. As one of the finishing touches, I wanted to add some backgrounds and animate them so they support the rest of the movements. Now these are quite simple, they are just some solids, and you can see that we start here with the white background that's just completely white, and I have that underneath everything. Then I have a black background scaling in. You can see the value change is highest at the start and then it sort of eases out a bit. And that's just scaling from the right to the left because of the placement of the anchor point. And that just sort of supports this movement from right to left. Then right as we switch to the next scene, I just make it completely white, so I cut that black layer. And again, this is just to emphasize that we're switching between 1 and 3 heads. Then when we go ahead here and start to move upwards, I have this black solid again. This time, just see I have a lot of easing at the start and the end. And then it just moves upwards with everything else. And at the very end, I just have this white solid that's scaled from right to left. And you just see everything becomes white and it matches perfectly with the start here, and then it turns black. So this is just overall to support the different movements and make everything a bit more interesting. Now for the black solids, I've added a 4-color gradient. You can just see if I make it completely black, the 3D object stands out too much and it's not composited that well. So instead I've taken some gray and dark tones from the 3D model, and then I've also taken just some of the gold colors and I've just placed these points very far away. So that way we just have a bit of light on both sides, and that just matches perfectly with the sort of rim light that we have on the object. Now for the final compositing, I have taken everything and I've just pre-composed it, so we have this animation main. This just makes it a bit more easy to work with. Then I've added a vignette and some grain. You can see if I zoom in, just have a bit of grain here. And to create this, first of all, we'll start with the vignette. We'll go to Layer, New Solid, and just select some gold color. We just take one from the text, call this the vignette. And right now we want it to be sort of placed towards the edges. So we'll find our ellipse tool and double click it. And then we want to go to our mask and just subtract it instead, so we sort of invert it. Now this is way too harsh. So we can just increase the feather quite a bit. Go into the opacity by pressing T, setting it to maybe 75%, and you can still see it's way too harsh. When it's on white, it may work, but this is because the mode is set to normal. You can find the mode by toggling switches/modes, and we just want to multiply this instead. It just adds a much nicer look overall. And now we can add the grain by going to Layer, New Adjustment Layer. I can just call this grain, and the adjustment layer just makes sure that every single effect that's added to it will be added to all the layers underneath. So we can search for the grain. You can also use noise. I just like to use the grain. And when we zoom in, we have this preview box. So it's maybe a bit too much. We can go 0.8. And if you want it a bit more crisp, a bit sharper, we can decrease the size to maybe 0.7. Then when we set it to final output, you can just see we have the grain all over the place, and it just makes the 3D model less clean, which is a look that I really like. And that way we have our final result. I hope that you learned something new about transitions, compositing, and how to use 3D images in your animations. Make sure to check out Yellow Images and the Yellow Ticket to get 90% discount on assets, free items for free every month, 30% discount for custom mockups, and 50% discount from the Creative Store. Follow the link in my description and use the code Oliver30 to get 30% off a free month or annual premium membership Yellow Ticket and an annual team membership Yellow Ticket. This coupon is limited and valid for 1 month only, starting today. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to leave a like, post a comment down below and tell me if you have any questions for this one or any suggestions for future videos. If you create anything from this, make sure to share it with me on Instagram at Oliver Randorf, and make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to get notified when I upload future videos. That's all for now, till next time.